The Communist Party itself, and the elders in particular, wanted to get rid of Xi Jinping because he had destabilized the entire country to the point of a strategic collapse. Food was out, water was unworkable and undrinkable. So you had the poverty growing by the day on mainland China. So the CCP, Communist Party of China, had to contain him. They have now done that, and we've said this repeatedly. We said that this was coming because the whole Xi era failed China economically, and the country was in collapse.
This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor. Gregory Copley, editor and publisher of Defense and Foreign Affairs, my mentor, joins to comment on AUKUS, Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, a triple alliance hammered out under the Biden administration and these last weeks under review by the new leadership at the Department of Defense. A question raised whether it was going to remain part of the Library of the Future or be retired along with other programs of the Biden administration. Gregory joins to comment because AUKUS will eventually, if it goes through, enliven the life of the people from Western Australia, where Gregory hails from Perth and from Fremantle, and all of the boat building opportunities for Australia into the indefinite future. However, we begin with the news from the G7. Before Mr. Trump left to go back to Washington, we're told to concern himself with decision-making in the Israeli-Iran conflict, he had a conversation with Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the Great Britain, the UK part of AUKUS. And that conversation went positively, says the Prime Minister, and he passed that on to the Prime Minister of Australia, Mr. Albanese, who was also in attendance in the Canadian Rockies. And Mr. Albanese says he's confident AUKUS is going forward. So it appears that Keir Starmer is a Trump whisperer, or Mr. Trump was always disposed to the project. Gregory, what is the mission of AUKUS and what does it look like? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John. Well, the mission of AUKUS is clouded in mystery. It began when Australia said it needed to have nuclear submarines and approached the United Kingdom for the supply of such vessels, or the supply of shipbuilding cooperation for nuclear submarines. The UK said that its nuclear propulsion technology was shared with the United States, and for the UK to help in this, they would have to get US support. So that went through, and that became the basis of AUKUS in 2021, was to create the technology transfer so that Australia could not only build nuclear submarines in Australia, but that it could also buy nuclear submarines off the shelf, if you like, from the US and UK, and could also service US and British nuclear submarines at HMAS Stirling, the stone frigate or shore base near Perth, which is the home to most of the submarine fleet of Australia. And that's what's been going on. They've been actually starting the servicing of US Virginia-class attack submarines in Stirling, and that's underway. Australian sailors and officers are on board US and British nuclear submarines now. They are learning the arts. The legislation has gone through so that technology transfer to Australia can occur. However, AUKUS then showed that it had the potential to be much more. It's the only modern alliance, if you like, since the Cold War of any consequence. It enables Britain, the US, and Australia, three almost harmoniously linked countries with common practices in defense particularly, to dominate the world from the North Atlantic to the South Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean, North and South Pacific. So it had enormous potential. AUKUS then moved to what they called Pillar 2, which went beyond nuclear submarines, and it was the sharing of military technology of a wide array of specialities. And that's been very successful in starting up. However, the concept and the vision, the greater vision for AUKUS has never been defined. And I made the comment recently was that AUKUS stands the chance of being one of the old treaties which was going to be junked by President Trump, or it's going to be the first of the new treaties, the new world alliance structure, which involves the US and its allies going forward. And President Trump, it really gave the first indication at the G7 meeting in Canada that AUKUS was on his list to go ahead. That doesn't mean that the sale of US Virginia-class submarines to the Royal Australian Navy will take place, largely because the US is having grave difficulty in producing enough Virginia-class attack submarines for its own purposes. Now, Australia's put several $billions into the US shipbuilding infrastructure to help the US get back in shape with its nuclear submarine building capability, but it's still not enough. And by the way, they're too expensive for Australia. They won't be delivered until after the China threat has come and gone. So Australia may well just hang on until it takes delivery of its AUKUS Plus class submarines, which it's developing with the United Kingdom. And even that may be too much, really. The question is large nuclear attack submarine going to be the kind of weapon you need in the 2050s and beyond? That's the real question. So they have to define what AUKUS is. It's got to go ahead now from President Trump. That saved Prime Minister Albanese, who was supposed to meet with President Trump in Canada, and President Trump left before he could meet with Albanese. So at least through Prime Minister Starmer of the United Kingdom, they were able to get the word out, well, Trump approves of AUKUS. So that's a sort of half-hearted, non-specific answer to the question.
The report I had from the FT, given this is London talking, and a London that is suspicious of all programs, said that the initial interest was 5 Virginia-class submarines to be purchased from the United States. What slows that down is the opinion that we're not building Virginia-class as fast as we expected. At the same time, the Australian part of it would not be ready until 2040, and that those attack boats will be built differently than the Virginia class because of the difference between the North Atlantic and the Indian Ocean. Is that correct, Gregory?
Well, that's partly the case. The question is whether Australia needs such a big SSN as the Virginia class. It's operating now with conventional submarines because they're very good and smaller and quieter in the shallow waters of the ASEAN Straits, going around Indonesia and the like, and up into the South China Sea, shallow waters. You don't want a big submarine with a big signature. You want something quiet, small, and stealthy, but with some endurance. And that's the problem with conventional boats. You need to find a way to boost their endurance. And modern weapons attached to these submarines, submarine-launched cruise missiles, which need to get improved dramatically, perhaps with nuclear warheads attacking fleet elements or attacking shore targets and the like. These are all elements which need to be considered, along with the thought that we are now seeing substantially scaled unmanned submarines which could carry these weapons without having to have a great fleet of manned nuclear submarines. So the question is, what's the threat going to be in 2030, 2040, 2050, 2060? Because these vessels essentially can last through the end of this century, and we don't know what the threat or other technologies and countermeasures are going to be at that point. Certainly, the China threat will have raised its head and or disappeared within the next 5 years.
Let's mention the China threat. There is repeated information that Xi Jinping, having extended his general secretaryship for an unprecedented third term, is no longer trusted by the decision makers, and that as they meet in August, they'll be going in a new direction. Names are mentioned, names of men who are 60, in their 60s or younger than 60. Would that benefit China? Would they back off from being hostile at that point, Gregory, or is this going to be a new hostile younger group?
Well, the first thing was that the Communist Party itself, and the elders in particular, wanted to get rid of Xi Jinping because he had destabilized the entire country to the point of a strategic collapse. Uh, Food was out, water was unworkable and undrinkable. So you had the poverty growing by the day on mainland China. So the CCP, Communist Party of China, had to contain him. They have now done that, and we've said this repeatedly. We said that this was coming because the whole Xi era failed China economically, and the country was in collapse. The party has acted too late. They've contained Xi. He's now out of office effectively. They are mulling his replacement, and it certainly will be a collective leadership and a much more moderate one, all of whom are aware of the absolute necessity of not getting into foreign adventures and in regaining foreign direct investment and foreign trade. That is possible if President Trump basically takes the pressure off after he meets the new leaders like Wang Yang and the like, who's likely to be the next General Secretary of the Communist Party. But the question is, does President Trump want to get rid of Xi and keep the Communist Party, or does he want to see China totally freed from the Communist Party? And if he wants the latter, then he has to keep up the pressure so that the collapse takes place. The Communist Party now has as its main objective staying in power and keeping the country under control. And that's increasingly problematic as the problems continue. It's getting worse by the day. Can they hold out until the new leadership is finally announced, possibly in August, or maybe it won't even be announced until November, following the Batchelor gathering of elders at the resort of Batchelor later this year. The party knows that it has to move fairly quickly. Xi has already apparently agreed to resign and retire. He's done a deal to protect his family, or so he believes. The question is, will that be followed or not? I think the party is quite happy to probably keep him alive and quarantined so that they can just get back to business. And that, by the way, that means almost certainly that they will shelve the idea of an adventure against Taiwan. I think we're now at the point where the adventure against Taiwan has been postponed, perhaps indefinitely, for Taiwan's sake, and perhaps even for the West's sake. They'll want China to be subdued and removed from communist control.
Rushing to West Africa, AUKUS was the transnational organization that was said to be developing the economies of Western African states, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Togo, Mali, Niger, and especially Nigeria. But the report that Gregory files with one of his colleagues is about Nigeria's internal security collapsing or near to collapse. There are a lot of explanations, but one of them has to be with that Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali have all shed their democratic camouflage and have gone strongman, although all of them are also targets for what remains of the jihadists in West Africa, rising all the time in conflict with what apparently is also an ISIS element. Gregory, my scorecard's all marked up. Let's concentrate on Nigeria. Does it have the wherewithal to defend itself from the incursion of the jihadists?
It certainly does. Nigeria is, largest population in Africa. It's the largest economy in Africa. It has an efficient defense force, which is now taxed beyond belief and has low morale and poor political leadership. And we particularly find that the counter-jihadi movement tends to be worse when you have a southern leader in the country. And right now, Bola Tinubu is the president, and he's from Lagos and was former governor of Lagos State. He has a lot of the age-related afflictions that we saw with President Biden in the United States. So he is not giving much attention to the problems in the north and in the south. The north and the northwest and northeast both face jihadist problems. They both face problems of banditry, which is, if you like, jihadism without the ideology, but there for the money. And you've got other separatist claims in parts of the south, like the old Biafra group, which is certainly active again. The collapse of ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, was particularly significant because ECOWAS is probably the most effective, was probably the most effective transnational organization in Africa, definitely, and possibly anywhere in the world. I mean, it was far more cohesive and productive than, say, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization for Eurasia or the organization, the OAS, the in the Americas. So the collapse of ECOWAS is a tragedy, and what we saw, as you mentioned, was that Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali essentially withdrew from that, and they've created a new forum for Sahelian states, and they are avoiding. They've kicked out the French, who were giving them some stability, but they were milking the countries dry in many respects, and we see that that's also going to happen shortly with Chad. I think Chad is now moving against its French connection as well. So you've got the rise or the re-rise, if you like, of jihadism, not with Boko Haram, and that's affiliated with Al Qaeda. You've got Al Qaeda itself in West Africa. You've got split-offs which formed the Islamic State in West Africa and several others. There are new groups now just being formed, and these are very, very taxing. Now, I was working with them some years ago when that process was absolutely brought under control. And it was doable with a sound military political operation which addressed the underlying causes of the jihadism, most of which is not religiously based. The religion, if you like, coalesced it. The problems are social and economic and largely related to the drying up
all between Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Iranian Foreign Minister
of
Saeed
the
Abbas
Niger
Araghchi.
Basin.
He stated that influence
Just a
in
minute,
Iran-Israel war.
Start again. Continue, please.
Yeah, the problem was the drying up of the Niger River and the Niger River Basin, which made transportation and agriculture much more difficult and therefore made poverty more endemic in the northeast, particularly of Nigeria. So essentially,
We have 30 seconds. Is there an organization to step in to put this back together again? Or are we watching deterioration inevitable?
deterioration is not inevitable. I think there's going to have to be a series of new bilaterals, and that could be done between, for example, Nigeria, Niger, and Chad at a starting point. The Chinese have not been of any help at all, although they've promised to be of help to the regional states. The United Nations is stepping up a focus on it. They're having a big anniversary for the 50th anniversary of ECOWAS in the coming weeks. But frankly, the world is not paying attention,
Right.
and this is going to be very bad.
Headline, Wall Street Journal, within these hours. U.S. strike on Iran among options being considered by President Trump. President meeting with top advisors, Situation Room officials say. Europe backs Israel against Iran despite anger over Gaza, says a subhead. Oil tankers collide near UAE as Israel-Iran conflict disrupts shipping. There are more headlines. They're all alarming. They're all pointing to the campaign launched last week by Israel to destroy the suspect nuclear weapons program, but mostly to decapitate not only the military, but also the scientific community that was part of the Ahmad plan to weaponize the uranium ore that is being processed by centrifuges, some of which have been destroyed in the initial attacks at Parchin, Isfahan, and Natanz, none of which have been destroyed at the big mountain Fordo, and that is said to be out of reach of the IAF and for the Americans. However, that's war fighting, and we will watch it for days or weeks. We don't know, but I'm interested to draw out Gregory Copley, my colleague, on the day after. You will recall that the U.S. has not been successful the day after in Afghanistan, hence the Taliban moved back in. In Iraq, hence Iraq became a client state of Iran, fragmenting the nation into Kurds in the north and Shia in the south and Sunni in the west and Iran everywhere. So Are we looking at another situation where the U.S. is going to impose its will, or Israel and the U.S. are going to impose their will and their cash, spend many years of fighting in some internecine fashion, and then abandon all hope? Gregory, I want to believe that Iran is different, but this is a much larger nation. This is a nation of sophisticated intellectual life. This is a nation with a diaspora that's vast in Europe and not unknown in America. So it is not what we would have to say was the agricultural base of Afghanistan or even the oil-rich but very undeveloped Iraq. This is a premier nation that dates itself back thousands of years. So how do you anticipate a day after, presuming this regime either flees or falls to the bombs?
Well, we've had governments in Iran fall before in a revolutionary fashion, and have been replaced. In fact, the previous administration in Iran, the Pahlavi dynasty, came in at the after a fairly long gap after the collapse of the earlier monarchy. So we've seen this before. This time, however, it's much more pervasive. They brought the country into disrepute, both internationally and in its own among its own people. So the question is, will the United States and Israel make a foolhardy attempt to dominate and occupy a post-clerical Iran? The Iranians need this success for themselves. The United States made the mistake when the Berlin Wall felt of saying that it had conquered the Soviet Union. In fact, the Iranian nationalists were the ones who finally did the job and removed the communists there. And even in 1952-53, with the Mossadegh, the counter coup against Prime Minister or former Prime Minister Mossadegh, that was claimed as a success by the United States, which took it away from the Iranians, who actually were the ones who overthrew Mossadegh. Right now, the great success for Israel, for the United States, and for Iran, and for the world, in a sense, would be if the Iranian people could be empowered and encouraged to take this opportunity to seize back control. That would then require that no foreign troops are in there attempting to impose order and discipline and quell unrest. That's going to be critical. The problem is that there has not been a leadership emerging in the diaspora or domestically, largely because of the success of the clerics' counterinsurgency and counterintelligence programs. The Israelis now, Bibi Netanyahu has been talking about the former crown or the crown prince of the Pahlavi dynasty, Reza, who's basically based in the United States, as being a potential leader. Well, the Iranians don't believe that. The Iranians are angry that Reza has shown no great leadership capability. On the one hand, he has for decades taken money from the Israeli government, from the Saudi government, and from the CIA. So they don't believe that he is the true Iranian patriot who has suffered to lead his people back from the brink of the clerical regime. So the problem is, how is Iran going to emerge from this? We will see leadership groups emerge domestically. This has been the case with Iran all along. The leaders never show themselves until the last moment, because if you can see a leader 6 months in advance, that generally means he's going to be killed before the time is ripe. So we're going to see something emerge. The US and Israel are going to have to be very delicate about this. They have to remember that a preserved Iran is more beneficial to not only the Iranians, but to the West in general, because it offers the possibility of a friendship with the West, which enables overland traffic with Central Asia. And Central Asia, coupled with Iran at this stage, provide the great wedge to keep China and away from Russia, for example. So if this could be pro-Western, or then the gifts, the strategic gifts of that are unfathomable, much more than they were even when Nixon kept the Saudis and the Iranians happy despite their mutual opposition to each other. So it's a delicate time. It's very important that President Trump stops Bibi from just wanting to destroy things. It's very important too that the United States is not the one which is responsible for killing Khamenei. A lot of the clerics are leaving the country, and I think Khamenei would too if given the opportunity. I think the Russians will give them safe haven. China is not a factor in this at this stage. So what we have to see is, how do you approach this with caution? How do we encourage the upsurge of the Iranian civil population? Netanyahu has said pointedly that he wants that to happen, but he then tends to overreach and say that they need to kill Khamenei, which is true. The nuclear weapons are insignificant because they're not usable by Iran or anybody else. The real thing is you remove the threat by removing or decapitating the clerical leadership and restoring Iran to its historical foundation. And that's generally been a monarchy with a foot also in the military camp and a foot in the clerical camp, but very much a socially based social contract in the country, which they have not had under the clerics. Under the clerics, there was no social contract with the people.
I mentioned that some of our colleagues have said Russia's intention is to restore the ethnic diversity of Iran. It is not, it's maybe just 50% Farsi speaking. All around the edges are Arabs, Azeris, and other tribes of the Middle East. And to see Iran as a power in the Middle East, that would please Moscow. Would that also please Washington?
It should do. And in fact, there's no reason that you can't come to a modus vivendi which enables the US and Moscow and Iran and Israel, for that matter, to have mutually amicable relationships with Tehran. So that's very possible. I think the idea of this ethnic division has failed. It failed in Ethiopia, for example. It's good for foreigners to divide and conquer. It's not good for Iran to be divided. And although the primary language is Farsi only in 50–60% of the population, the reality is that Farsi is the lingua franca of the entire country, including the Armenian-speaking parts, the Kurdish-speaking parts, and the Arabic-speaking parts in Khuzestan and the like. In fact, combining that sense of Persian history, Persian destiny, Persian dignity, which the Shah was able to bring together, that's critical. The same way in Ethiopia, as the emperor combined 80 or so ethnic groups into a single Amharic-speaking mass to create a sense of the Solomonic multi-thousand-year history.
But Gregory, the temptation is that the U.S. and Israel, because they have the money and the time, will seek to influence the decision-making in Tehran. Is there a way to avoid that, or is that just the fate of empires?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, the United States and Israel are very, very short-term thinkers. They believe that resolving an issue is done kinetically rather than socially. They see the social breakup, if you like, of Iran as being something which is done at the point of a gun. And this can be dangerous. It's much harder to put things back together again. And there is this feeling in Israel and in the United States that it's not enough for them to succeed. All their friends must fail. There's this, they have to be not just primus inter pares, they have to be unquestionable leaders in the region. And that's very fragile, very dangerous, very short term. It's not as historically and civilizationally nuanced as it should be. And I think getting back to restoring, if you like, the Persian culture throughout Central Asia would overcome some of the rabid short-term neo-Ottomanist thinking of Turkey, for example.
It is the greater Middle East. It is Central Asia. It is our heritage. All of our heritages come out of here. 1,000 years ago. The stories of the Greeks the other side of that was the Persians. So
Yep.
it's it's fun to consider. It's the same Persian dignity, same thing, same artwork, same people, and
Yeah.
now they're under attack. Gregory, I confess to you, no kings surprised me because I didn't pay attention for the longest time. There are other things to do. There's a war in Ukraine, there's a war in Gaza, there's a war in Hezbollah, there's an economic package to watch, there's a big bill in Congress, and then no kings. And I thought, what is this? This is on Army Day, the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army. Good for that. My mom and dad are Army. They're at Arlington, so I pay attention. Okay. And then I realized no kings is maybe it's sports betting. It sounded like something that was sports betting. However, it turns out it was a protest by people who lost the last election or think they did. And they said no kings because that's their concept of monarchy. It's apparently something that is considered unattractive. In Britain, we're told there were no king's demonstrations, but they had to change the signs because it was offensive to the English and Scottish and Irish people who live in Northern Ireland. No kings. They have a king. It's King Charles III. So, Gregory, it's time to review monarchy, especially as Charles III practices it. In your book, Noble State, you make the case that a monarch is what the United States needs right now, somebody who can say to both sides, come and sit with me. What is a monarchy for the British people? What does it do for them? Not only Great Britain, but also King of Canada, King of Australia, King of New Zealand. How does it work, Gregory?
Well, the king is above government, it's above parliament, it's above the political factions of day-to-day living and day-to-day government. So you have the monarchs embody the ideals, the values, the nobility, the dignity of all of the nation, all of the people. It's as though you can live your life and knowing that the things you would like to believe of yourself and your country are enshrined in a symbolic leader, such as a king or a queen, or even an emperor, who basically stands for the things you believe in and you believe that you represent yourself individually. So it gives individual dignity, and the individuals then, of course, give dignity to the crown because it's there. That can achieve enormous senses of unity among the nation. It allows people to have different political views without thinking that the country is about to dissolve into civil war. It also gives the country enormous prestige in negotiation and in building alliances by being able to influence the world without having to go to war to achieve the imposition of will. The United States had a degree of that in its structure when the Constitution was viewed as some symbolic crown above even the presidency. And unfortunately, the Constitution itself has been, if you like, reduced to politics in recent decades in the United States. And I think it's okay, you could blame one party more than another, but the reality is that people no longer have that same respect or understanding for and of the Constitution. So the book, The Noble State, doesn't necessarily say that the United States needs a king. It's saying that there are a lot of things that the republics around the world can learn from modern constitutional monarchies, because the rise of the republics really happened over the last couple of hundred years. And like all civilizational forms, they have a lifespan. And we see that the republics themselves are running into these problems now. We're seeing these massive divisions within republican societies. So the constitutional monarchies, which finished the absolutist monarchies again a few hundred years ago, have gone through their own process of evolution in this recent time, and they are now listed always among the happiest countries in the world and often the wealthiest on a per capita basis. So there's a lot of stability in a constitutional monarchy because they're not riven by internal politics to the same degree as republics. So that's part of the how do we learn from each other aspect of the book. But the no kings situation was literally a dig at that. This is the new movement, if you like, against President Trump personally, and they were building this around the Army's anniversary, its 250th anniversary, which is significant. I mean, the United States Army is not partisan. It's helped protect the country. People from all walks of life and all political persuasions have joined it. So it's a national institution. But the parade itself was seen as something which was glorifying President Trump, and he did it to show that he's this king-like figure, which is not the case. If they wanted a comparison, you should have watched the Trooping of the Colour for the King's birthday in London in the last few days, which was magnificent and suited.
Gregory, quickly explain Trooping the Colors, where it takes place and how long. Yeah. It takes a long time as they march around with those horses.
Yeah, well, it's mostly a foot regiment situation, and it's each year one of the household brigade divisions, household divisions members regiments is given new colors. This year it was the Coldstream Guards, so they marched there. They had the support, if you like, of the Horse Guards as well. They marched to from the palace about a mile down to Horse Guards Parade, and there the king reviews them, presents them with the new colors, and they go back to their barracks.
Did the king ride this year? Did he mount a horse this year?
No, he didn't. And unfortunately, he did last year, which was quite dramatic.
Right.
This year, he went in a carriage, and but nonetheless, it was dignified, and a lot of the members of the royal family did ride alongside the
30 seconds, Gregory. No kings is not well informed about what kingship is these days. Is that a fair summary of that protest?
Nobody is well informed about anything these days. They go with slogans, and unfortunately, that's not helping the United States at this particular time.
The King of Canada, the King of Australia, the King of New Zealand, the King of Great Britain is Charles III, and they're lucky for it. Gregory Copley, editor and publisher of Defense and Foreign Affairs, author of Noble State. I'm John Batchelor.